At Floor & Decor, large in-stock selection is a given, not a gimmick. Complete projects for any budget with our in-stock tile, wood, stone, laminate, and more. From vinyl flooring to bathroom fixtures, we've got what you need when you need it. Get the job done with our wide selection, now in stock at your local Floor & Decor in Southwest San Antonio. Visit us in store or online at flooranddecor.com. A lot of people tolerate ordinary. Ordinary bathrooms, kitchens, entryways. Well, not on your watch. If you're a pro, you've got a new partner in town, Floor & Decor. From tile to wood to stone, Floor & Decor has more styles and job lot quantities of Schluter, Mapei, Laticrete, and other brands pros trust. Come see a whole new way to wow with Floor & Decor. Now open in Southwest San Antonio.
You're listening to Killer Communications, brought to you by AbJack Entertainment. Be sure to check out some of the other great true crime podcasts from this network, including The Murder in My Family, Missing Persons, DNA ID, Citizen Detective, Campus Killings, Scene of the Crime, Zodiac Speaking, and Beyond Bizarre True Crime. All of these podcasts are available for you to binge on right now, wherever you listen to podcasts. Subscribe where you're listening to this podcast so you don't miss an episode.
At 18 years old, Conrad Roy suffered from severe depression and anxiety. At 17, he tried to overdose on acetaminophen, but was saved by his best friend. He went to therapy, got medication, and by his graduation senior year, he seemed to be doing much better. So it was a horrifying shock to those who loved him when he was found dead in his truck from carbon monoxide poisoning. Originally ruled a suicide, Conrad's death would take a murderous turn when police uncovered the text message conversation on his phone. Chapter 1. Deleted Text. The story of Conrad Roy is often attached to a series of deleted texts to his phone. Some of them read, "Conrad, hey, you there? Why haven't you done it yet? You can't think about it. You just have to do it. You said you were going to do it. I don't get why you aren't. You keep pushing it off and you say you'll do it, but you never do. It's probably the best time now since everyone is asleep. Just go somewhere in your truck. If you don't want to do it now, you're never going to do it. Go in your truck and drive in a parking lot somewhere. You just need to do it, Conrad. The more you push it off, the more it will eat at you. You're ready and prepared. All you have to do is turn the generator on, and you'll be free and happy. No more pushing it off, no more waiting. Go someplace where you can't get caught. You can find a place. I know you can. You just got to do it, babe. You just got to do it. I believe in you." Investigators uncovered these texts and hundreds more that were deleted on Conrad's phone from a 17-year-old girl named Michelle Carter. Though she lived an hour away from Conrad on the Massachusetts coast, the two had met through mutual family friends on a vacation to Florida in 2012. They'd stayed in contact after the vacation, texting, emailing, and calling each other constantly over the course of 2 years. In that time, Conrad vulnerably admitted to Michelle that he suffered from depression and anxiety. But despite therapy and the antidepressant and anxiety meds he was prescribed, Conrad still struggled with suicidal thoughts. And he seemed to have found an empathetic ear in Michelle, who suffered from an eating disorder herself and dealt with her own anxiety demons, for which she was also prescribed medication. So how did this seemingly supportive friendship turn to something potentially deadly? Chapter 2. Meeting Conrad. By all accounts, Conrad Roy grew up in a loving family during his early childhood. The only boy and oldest child in a family of 5, Conrad's mother, Lynn, described him as a happy child who was most at home on the water, where his father and grandfather owned a marine salvage business. From a very early age, he helped his father and grandfather on their boat, docked not far from their house in Mattapoisett, Massachusetts. But as Conrad grew into a teenager, he began struggling with his mental health. While his parents first figured it was just hormones making him moody, their marriage began to fail when Conrad started high school. And in 2011, things took a tumultuous turn when the cops were called for a domestic violence incident between Conrad's parents, where his father alleged he was attacked in front of his children. And not long after, cops were back at the house a second time to break up an altercation between Conrad and his father. His parents divorced soon after, and their breakup hit Conrad hard. His mom, Lynn, was worried about his well-being, and his grades at school began to slip. Conrad admitted he was having a hard time concentrating and struggling with feeling down, and his depression got so bad that in October 2012, he overdosed on acetaminophen. However, after taking the pills, he got scared and called for help. After this incident, Conrad was taken for professional therapy and put on an antidepressant, which seemed to help him immensely, at least from the outside. Conrad's grades improved to the point that he graduated high school in 2014 at the top of his class, with a full-ride scholarship to Fitchburg State University. He also obtained his license to be a tugboat captain, a feat he'd spent 3 months of night classes to achieve, while also playing baseball, rowing on the high school's rowing team, and running track. It seemed like things were going good for Conrad, but underneath the facade of his success, he wasn't really feeling any better. Chapter 3. A Questionable Influence. Perhaps meeting Michelle when Conrad was at his lowest in the summer of 2012, right after his parents divorced, was what set up the chain of events that was to follow. Now, according to Conrad's two sisters, Michelle was a smiling, seemingly happy young woman who made Conrad laugh during the Florida trip where their families hung out together. But later information would reveal that this was a mask hiding an insecure and lonely teenage girl. Michelle suffered from an eating disorder at age 9, and by her teenage years, her anxiety and depression around eating had gotten so bad, she began cutting herself. At one point, she was hospitalized for her eating issues and was placed on medications to assist her with anxiety. But like Conrad, while the medications seemed to help her from the outside, Michelle struggled to fit in at school. According to several of her classmates, Michelle came on strong and tended to share details that were far too intimate about her issues right from the beginning of a friendship. Once she believed she was friends with someone, Michelle texted them constantly, and if she didn't receive an immediate answer, she'd send texts like, "I don't want you to hate me," or "I have no friends." Michelle's classmate, Samantha Boardman, described that while she tried to be supportive of Michelle about her eating disorder by watching what Michelle ate at school and texting her to see if she was okay at home, Sam had a life outside of Michelle, and Michelle didn't seem to respect that. Michelle often texted Sam complaining that she had no school friends and that no one ever called her or made an effort to hang out with her, when that was clearly not the case. In Michelle's mind, Sam just didn't text her enough or hang out enough, not as much as the lonely teen wanted. Other classmates recalled that Michelle would often get their number through a group chat or through a common friend, and began texting them deeply personal information about her struggles and loneliness. In one instance, a girl named Allie Either told Oxygen that Michelle had gotten her number off group text from the summer camp they both volunteered at, and immediately began texting Allie about the rough time she was having with her boyfriend. Allie recalled not knowing Michelle at all, except for seeing her around the camp, and simply responded, "I don't know you very well." And she also said that she couldn't help Michelle with her problems. But when Michelle and Conrad met in 2012, there seemed to be some kind of instant connection between the two, especially after Michelle told Conrad about her own eating disorder and struggle with anxiety, for which she was taking medication too. Maybe knowing this helped Conrad feel less alone. He wasn't the only teenager with mental health struggles, and the two teens began a relationship. And though Michelle and her family lived only about an hour away from Conrad in Plainville, Massachusetts, The two rarely saw each other after the Florida trip ended. Lynn recalled to the show 48 Hours that aside from Conrad's funeral, she only met Michelle one other time at one of Conrad's baseball games. The teen's whole relationship was conducted through text, phone calls, and emails. Perhaps Michelle was finally getting the attention and sense of belonging she so craved by being in constant contact with Conrad. Perhaps Conrad felt like someone was really listening to him and taking his anxiety seriously, or at least understood where he was coming from. And for the first few months they were in contact, Michelle really did seem to be helping Conrad. When he told her about his suicidal thoughts following his parents' divorce, she offered to call the suicide hotline for him and urged him to talk to his doctors about how he felt. She told him he had so much to live for, and she loved him and didn't want him to die. After he was saved from the acetaminophen overdose, Conrad allegedly tried to die by suicide a second time by overdosing on sleeping pills. When they failed, he texted Michelle, who encouraged him to get help, saying that she would get help too and they could get better together. In a text she sent not long after the failed attempt, she told Conrad, "We would get through our issues together. Think about it. You aren't going to get better on your own. You know it no matter how many times you tell yourself you are. You need professional help like me, people who know how to treat it and fix it." But in June 2014, the tone of Michelle and Conrad's conversations changed in an ominous fashion. Chapter 4. Hatching a Plan. Michelle and Conrad began to discuss suicide in earnest, and not just theoretically, but specifically, with Michelle making suggestions about different ways Conrad could die. She sent him texts that read, "What about hanging yourself or stabbing yourself? And why don't you just drink bleach?" After several exchanges, Michelle suggested carbon monoxide poisoning, saying there was no pain, and Conrad could simply turn his car on in the garage and fall asleep to commit the task. Conrad responded that Michelle was a genius, and that he could use a portable generator from work that he could put in his truck. At one point, Conrad expressed to Michelle that they should be like Romeo and Juliet, both taking their own lives together, like the characters in Shakespeare's play. But Michelle responded by saying that she didn't want them both to die, but she continued to encourage Conrad in his own thoughts of suicide. After deciding on carbon monoxide poison via a generator as the method, Michelle began to consistently ask Conrad when he was going to take his own life. And when he vacillated, Michelle texted him things like, "So I guess you aren't going to do it then. All that for nothing. I'm just confused. Like you were so ready and determined." In the first week of July 2014, Michelle sent Conrad over 40 texts encouraging him to just do it. But how could this change of heart have happened? Only months prior, Michelle had been encouraging Conrad to get professional help, telling him they would get better together. How could she flip so far the other way and pressure Conrad into taking his own life? There are two theories. The first is that in the spring of 2014, Michelle's psychiatrist switched her from Prozac, which she was taking for depression and anxiety, to a drug called Celexa. While Conrad was also on Celexa, and it's a drug known to cause suicidal tendencies in teens, it can also disrupt frontal lobe function, which can lead to behavioral changes. It's been proposed that Michelle's personality did seem to change following her starting Celexa, with her family noting that she went from being very caring to irrational and irritable. It's possible that she had an adverse side effect to the medication change that prompted her to become annoyed and angry that she was, at least in her mind, helping Conrad achieve his goal, and he wasn't doing it. A second theory is that around the time she and Conrad became a couple, Michelle was having a very hard time making connections with friends at school, and she needed something awful to happen in her life to gain sympathy and attention from her peers. There's evidence that around the same time she was pressuring Conrad to go through with his plan to die by suicide, Michelle spread a rumor to several of her classmates that her boyfriend Conrad had gone missing, and Michelle feared for his safety, telling friends he was suicidal. Meanwhile, Michelle was in constant contact with Conrad, and texted or spoke to him several times a day, so she knew he wasn't missing. But this missing ploy seemed to work, with several of Michelle's female classmates rallying around her to comfort her as she blamed herself for not helping Conrad more. As the attention and sympathy she received grew, it's possible Michelle realized that she'd have to up the ante to keep the attention on herself. And the only way she could see that happening was if Conrad went through with his plan. Chapter 5. A Life Taken. On July 12, 2014, Michelle texted Conrad extensively over a 12-hour period, pressuring him about when he was going to do the deed. She reminded him that he had to do it now, today, because he'd been putting it off, and he'd just keep putting it off if he didn't just do it. And while Conrad hedged that he knew Michelle was right, he felt bad leaving his family behind, and was having a lot of anxiety about making such a huge decision. But for every hesitation that Conrad pointed out, Michelle seemed to have a solution. As far as leaving his family, Michelle texted that she would take care of them, make sure they were okay, and that eventually they would love Conrad enough to accept his decision. When he was worried he'd hurt whoever found him with the carbon monoxide, Michelle suggested putting a sticky note on the generator to warn people what it was so they could take precautions. And when their text conversation went well into the early hours of the morning, and Conrad said it was getting too light out for him to leave, Michelle reminded him it was the best time to take his truck out to a secluded place, because everyone would be asleep still, and no one would bother him. Conrad finally relented, promising Michelle that after taking his sisters out for ice cream that night, he would drive to a secluded part of the Kmart parking lot and take his life. The couple stayed in close contact the rest of the day, texting back and forth every few minutes, with Michelle continuing to encourage Conrad to stick with his plan. 6 p.m. that night, after bringing his sisters back from ice cream, Conrad told his mom he was going to a friend's house and he'd be back, but he never came home. By July 13th, his family knew something was wrong. They began searching and put in a missing persons report for Conrad. Unfortunately, police found him in the Kmart parking lot, inside his truck, dead from carbon monoxide poisoning. Chapter 6. An Unprecedented Case. Initially ruled a suicide based on Conrad's past mental health issues, his family mourned their inability to help him through his depression and held his funeral only a week later on July 19, 2014. In attendance was Michelle Carter, sitting close to the family pew and sobbing into a tissue. She hugged Conrad's mother and told her how sorry she was about Conrad's passing and felt awful that she hadn't been able to help him. She admonished how much she'd loved Conrad and thought they would be together forever. But what investigators were about to discover would turn Michelle's grief into something that looked much more sinister. In going through Conrad's phone to ensure that his death was indeed a suicide, police uncovered thousands of text messages between Conrad and Michelle. And the month before Conrad took his life, hundreds of Michelle's texts centered around suicide. But what was of most interest to police were the texts that she sent Conrad after he drove to the Kmart parking lot. According to police records, Michelle stayed in contact with Conrad throughout the ordeal, coaching him in turning on the generator and taking a 40-minute phone call with him as he sat in the truck. Evidence pointed to the fact that after turning on the generator, Conrad was in pain from the asphyxiation and got out of his truck, telling Michelle he was scared and that he didn't want to go through with it. Michelle texted him back to get into the truck and close the door. This all led to the question, would Conrad have gone through with the suicide if he hadn't been texting with Michelle that night? Investigators believe Conrad may have lived if not pressured by Michelle. After all, following his overdose the year before, he'd become scared and called for help. But that didn't happen this time. Instead of calling for help, he stayed on the phone with Michelle, and she kept pressuring him to end his life. And that led to a question for authorities. Did that make her culpable in his death? A grand jury believes so, indicted Michelle Carter with involuntary manslaughter on February 4th, 2015. They cited that there was enough evidence pointing to the fact that she wantonly and recklessly assisted in Conrad Roy's suicide. But this would be an unprecedented case in the Massachusetts courts, as there were no laws in the book at that time that criminalized suicide assistance. And Michelle's case was especially blurry, since she hadn't been physically present at the time of Conrad's death. But as Michelle's defense team began planning out a strategy, other evidence was uncovered that made Michelle look even more responsible. In a series of text messages to her classmate Samantha Boardman, Michelle wrote, "Sam, his death is my fault. Like, honestly, I could have stopped him. I was on the phone with him and he got out of the car because it was working, and he got scared, and I fucking told him to get back in." But most damning was her second text. "I just got off the phone with Conrad's mom about 20 minutes ago, and she told me that detectives had to come and go through his things and stuff. It's something they have to do with suicides and homicides. Sam, if they read my messages with him, I'm done. His family will hate me, and I could go to jail." Coupled with the fact that Michelle often told Conrad to delete the text conversations the two of them had about suicide, prosecutors believe Michelle knew exactly what she was doing when she told Conrad to take his own life. While the defense motioned to appeal the grand jury indictment on the grounds that text messages were covered under the First Amendment law and were private, the motion was denied, with a board of unanimous judges citing there was probable cause in the manslaughter charge. From the defense's perspective, this plus text message evidence was too much to give to a jury, and they encouraged Michelle to do a bench trial instead, where she would only sit before a judge. Michelle agreed, sitting before Judge Lawrence Manas on June 6, 2017, as her case was discussed over a 6-day trial. After hearing both sides, the judge found Michelle guilty of involuntary manslaughter on the grounds that she had urged Conrad to get back in his truck after he broke the chain of self-causation toward suicide by exiting the vehicle. Despite her conviction, Michelle remained free on bail while she waited for sentencing, and her defense team began an appeal on the grounds that her First Amendment rights had been violated, and she had been denied her Fifth Amendment right to due process. Chapter 7. Appeals and Sentences. The question remains, were Michelle's rights violated? Let's break this down, starting with the First Amendment rights. According to an article by Victoria Lewin in the Houston Law Review, the Supreme Court has never considered whether criminalizing speech that encourages another to commit suicide violates the right to free speech. This means there's no law currently on the books saying that what Michelle did was criminal. The only policy that would come close to making what Michelle did criminal is what is known as true threat, which is defined as when a speaker uses statements indicating intent to commit an act of unlawful violence against a particular person or group. And it can be argued that this still doesn't apply to Michelle, as she was not threatening Conrad, she was encouraging him. At no point did she say anything in which she threatened him with bodily harm or violence. However, the Massachusetts courts were still able to find her speech criminal, since her text messages were integral to a course of criminal conduct, i.e. putting Conrad in a place where he felt he had to take his own life to please Michelle. And as far as the Fifth Amendment rights, again, according to Lujan, Michelle Carter cited that she lacked fair notice that she could be convicted in Conrad's suicide, stating that the way Massachusetts defined involuntary manslaughter was constitutionally vague and didn't apply to her situation. But the courts denied her claim. Though her defense team took her case all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court in 2019, citing that Michelle was bewildered over the case against her, and that taking all of her text into context, she'd really tried to talk Conrad out of it. But the Supreme Court declined to hear Michelle's case and upheld her conviction for manslaughter. She was sentenced to 15 months at the Bristol County House of Corrections and 5 years of probation. Michelle Carter began serving her sentence on February 11, 2019, after all her appeals were exhausted. She was released from prison on January 23, 2020, 3 months early due to good behavior, making her full term of time served 11 months and 12 days. While she stayed out of the press and under the radar, Michelle is 25 at the time of this recording and has 1 year left on her 5 years of probation. There's no public information as to her whereabouts, though some sources suggest she's back in Plainville, living with her family. Hopefully, wherever she is, she's reflected on her choices and is living a law-abiding life. Chapter 8. Conrad's Legacy. Upon Michelle's early release, the Roy family spoke out that they were satisfied with the justice Conrad had received, citing that news of the Supreme Court denying to hear her case far outshadowed the news of her early release. Her time in jail, no matter how long or short, will not change the outcome of a guilty verdict, which is thankfully being upheld. And while they also cited that no amount of justice would bring their son back, the family has worked hard to keep his legacy alive. Shortly following Conrad's death, the Roys established the Captain Conrad H. Roy III Scholarship Fund, the Northeast Maritime Institute, in his memory, as Conrad saw being a sea captain as one of his greatest accomplishments. His mother, Lynn, also began working with Massachusetts senators in 2019 to bring about Conrad's Law, a bill that would officially criminalize suicide coercion in Massachusetts and would result in a maximum 5-year prison sentence for those convicted. In 2023, the bill made it to the Massachusetts House of Representatives, and as of this recording, Conrad's Law is still under review. It poses many legal issues with rights to free speech, and it may still be a few years and several legal adjustments before it becomes law. Despite this, the Roy family brings awareness to Conrad's Law every year by hosting an annual 5K held in September in the Massachusetts town of Fairhaven. For any of our listeners who may struggle with suicide or know someone who does, we encourage you to call the Suicide Prevention Hotline 24/7 at 988. If our listeners would like more information on this case, there are several documentaries and a fictional retelling surrounding the texting suicide case of Conrad Roy. We invite you to check out 48 Hours episode Death by Text, Dateline's episode Reckless, HBO's I Love You Now Die, The Commonwealth vs. Michelle Carter, and Hulu's The Girl from Plainville. We'd also love to know your thoughts. Do you think Michelle Carter should have been prosecuted in Conrad's death, and was her sentence appropriate? Leave us a review and let us know. Audience invitation. Is there a case or an unexplained communication you'd like us to cover? Please take the time to rate and review the show, and in your comments, tell us what case you'd like us to tackle. You can also follow us and reach us on social media. We're on x.com at KillerCPod, and on Facebook at facebook.com/KillerCommunicationsPodcast. And be sure to check out our website, KillerCommunicationspodcast.com. Killer Communications listeners, if you want to support this show and get access to things like ad-free listening, early release episodes, and any bonus content, consider supporting us with an AbJack Insider subscription through Apple Podcasts. For $4.99 a month or $49.99 a year, your AbJack Insider subscription will not only unlock all of these great benefits for this show, but for every podcast on the AbJack network of indie podcasts. Get your AbJack Insider subscription started with a free trial. Simply head over to Apple Podcasts and search for AbJack Entertainment, and you'll find the option to set up and unlock your subscription and start enjoying all the benefits of being a subscriber. We'll also include a link in the show notes. Your support is greatly appreciated. Just a heads up, new episodes of Killer Communications air every other Saturday. Thanks for listening, and we hope you'll join us on the next episode of Killer Communications.
Killer Communications is narrated and produced by Mike Morford for AbJack Entertainment. It's researched and written by Abagail Belcastro. Be sure to visit the show's website, KillerCommunicationspodcast.com, for past episodes, social media links, show news, and more.